Hey art nerds! So in our last tutorial we talked about how to color paler skinned people like Kara. Today we're going to talk about how to color darker skinned people like Naomi. I want to caveat that there is a gamut of beautiful skin tones out there in this wide and wonderful world. These tutorials just cover a couple of them, but hopefully they will teach you some of the basic techniques you will need to color other skin tones. This is based on a few of my other tutorials. Here is a tutorial I recorded on selecting triads for skin tones, and these are the resulting mermaid swatches, just to give you an idea of just some of the beautiful color combinations that you can render for beautiful skin tones. This also builds on two of my lighting and contrast tutorials. We have here a lighting and contrast with Copic marker for a basic skull form. This is going to give you an idea of the basic planes, shapes, and curves of the skull. I highly recommend it if you don't even know where to start. And then it was followed up by this tutorial where I show you guys how to render the features of the face. And we did both of these with non-skin tones so that you guys could see where the shadows fall a little bit more clearly. You guys will find links to all of these in the description below, so I highly recommend you click through. In our last tutorial, we did this with lighter skin tones closer to mine for Kara from my comic 7-inch Kara. Today, we're going to do that with Naomi from the same comic 7-inch Kara. So, if you love beautiful watercolor stories that involve friendship and coming of age, a friendship between two girls and family, you should head on over to 7inchkara.com and 7inchkara.tumblr.com and check my wonderful webcomic out. This was recorded to help me prepare for my Coloring People with Copic's class taught at the Nashville area Plaza Arts. If you're interested in learning in person and you live in the Nashville area, you ought to sign up for one of my classes. They're quite affordable and we cover a lot of information. There's nothing quite like working one-on-one with a teacher in person. And if you like what I do and you want to help support it and you want to color along, my art nerds, not art nerds, my art nerds will have access to this Naomi template. They will have access to the line art for the Kara template. They will have access to the line art for the head form template. And they also have access to the head form for the skull form template. For only $2 a month, you can join the Art Nerd community, gain access to this and more, and help support this channel. Okay, let's go ahead, select some colors, and dive in. So I went ahead and pulled some of the colors that I want to use for this Naomi rendering demonstration. But I want to swatch them for you guys for a couple of reasons. One, I always swatch my markers. And two, you should always swatch your markers. So for her skin tones, we are starting with the triad of E17, E17, and E49. We're going to use W9 for our darkest shadows. I do need to select a dark blue violet as a shading color for her. For her hair, we're going to use W9, W10, and 110, and I may select another color because these are all very similar and I do want to build up some contrast. For her blush and lips, we're going to use E04, R39, and R59. For her eyes, we're going to use Y00, YG03, and YG63 with B18. And we're also going to use B000 as a shading color on her eyes, as well as colorless blender. Okay, I have my colors swatched and selected. The reason you guys saw me doing it that way is I wanted to make sure everything would work the way I saw it in my head. And Naomi is a dear character to mine, one of the two main characters of my story, so I don't really want to screw her up. So the colors we're going to use E17, we're going to use E27, we're going to use E49, and that's kind of the basic for her skin. We're going to use E34 rather than a colorless blender to blend out when we need a lighter variation of the color. You can use lighter skin tones to blend out darker skin tones to put highlights in the cheeks. We're going to use E04. We're going to use R39. And we're going to use R59 as blush and lip colors on Naomi. For the shadow colors, we are going to use BV25 and B17. And just as we're selecting darker tones for the skin, we're selecting darker tones to shade it, and we're selecting darker tones for the blush and the lips. For the hair, we're going to start with E71. That's going to give us some contrast, some highlights in her hair, and I am going to add some white highlights where the light's kind of catching the tops of her curls. We're going to use, sorry, grab the wrong one, W9. We're going to use W10. And we're going to use 1010 for her hair. Naomi has hazel eyes, so we're going to use YG quadruple 0, which is a very, very light yellow green. That's going to give us kind of our lightest tone. We're going to use YG03. And we're going to use YG63 as the base of her eye. And we're also going to use BG18 in her eye as well. And then we're going to use B000 as the shading color for her eye. So I'm going to walk you guys through the front facing view from start to finish, and then we're going to kind of work on the rest in a combination of time lapse and real time, and hopefully that'll help you guys kind of better understand not only how to color darker skin tones, but how to color using light and contrast. So as with Kara, we are going to start with B000. So here's where things get kind of interesting. When I'm coloring darker skin people, I like to start with my blush tone first, just kind of set the stage. And I also like to start with a lighter shadow tone, often just to kind of pre-tone the skin. When you're working with alcohol markers, if you use a lighter tone over a darker tone, it's going to set that color back. If you use a lighter tone under a darker tone, it will influence that color more. So I'm actually going to grab a blue violet. We're going to grab, let's say, BV23, and I'll swatch it really quick off camera. Yeah, I think that'll work, and we'll use that BV23 as kind of a pre-tone. So we're going to start, actually let's start with BV23, and this will be kind of a good exercise for talking about the zones of tone on the face, the zones of shadow. So I'm going to color in the insides of her ears, and if this looks too dark to you, you can use a lighter color, or we can knock it back using the colorless blender, which I'll demonstrate in a moment. We're going to do the tops of her eyes. I'm not doing the full domino mask with this because that might just set her eyes back too far, and she's 14, she's a little bit young to have heavy set eyes. Beneath her nose and the top of her nose. And we're going to give some definition to her lips. As well as, I forget what it's called, but the little divot underneath where your nose meet your lips. Philtrum, I think is the word. Then we're also going to just kind of follow the contours of her face. And as with our other tutorials, I should mention the light source is coming from the top right. I'm just doing that to kind of be consistent. So you might find that this is a little bit harsh. You might be a little bit worried about this. This is the only time, other than when we're doing the eyes, where you can pull out that colorless blender and sort of soften that transition. Now the thing is, all the other layers that we're going to put on top of this, it's going to soften that transition too. So this is just kind of pre-toning the image, laying in our shadows early, because sometimes it's harder to do that later on. I'm going to give this a chance to evaporate, and then we're going to start with E04. Alright, that's had a chance to evaporate, so we are going to apply our E04, and I like to start with the lips. And don't worry if they seem kind of overextended. Again, we're just creating a base tone, a beginning tone. Then we're going to do across the cheekbones, underneath the nose. I like to do the tops of the eyes, kind of like a little bit of makeup almost. The insides of the ears. And again, you can blend it out if it makes you uncomfortable, if you feel like it's too stark. But I recommend just trying it once and seeing how you like it. Next, we're gonna do a all over fill with E17, and I'll do that fill and then get back to you guys. Okay, so we applied an all over base of E17. I'm just gonna push that out just a little bit. Some of it got into her eyes. I wouldn't want alcohol marker in my eyes, so I'm sure Naomi doesn't want alcohol marker in her eyes. Now, if you feel like this is too dark, or maybe you want to add some highlights, please don't use white, and please don't use the colorless blender. Use a lighter skin tone. So we're going to use E34 here, and we're just going to do some at the tips of her nose, and you might want to do some on the apples of her cheeks. And I know it looks darker now, but it's pushing that color to the back, and you can even see where I pre-toned it, and it's much less striking now. So we're going to go in again with E17. And I'm going to start with the outside of her face and then work my way in. Now, you can't really blend out with the same color, so we're kind of using this to establish our shadows and establish the forms on the face. Now I'll go in and do our little domino mask. as well as maybe start with the cast shadows on her hair. Now it doesn't really bother me if I get this color in her hair. Her hair is going to be pretty dark, so I don't think that's going to really be a concern. And remember what I said about the fact that you can get about 3 layers of color from each marker. I also like to follow the creases of the mouth a little bit. It just kind of gives more form to the face. Okay, so that was E17. We'll set it aside. Now if we go in with E04, it will add some pink, but it's also going to push some of that color back a little bit, and that can be used to your advantage if you want. So I'm going to apply it across the bridge of her nose again and the insides of her ears. And then we're going to go in with E27. I'm coloring the interiors of her ears, the underside of her nose, her eye sockets going up into her eyebrows. Same on the other side, and then we want to give the face some definition. And if you feel like it's too extreme, you can blend it out with the pass color. I want to give a little bit of shadow underneath the mole, underneath her lips. And certainly where her hair crosses over her face. You might want to do more on her forehead. That's really kind of up to you. Now we're going to go back in with our E27. And remember, we get 3 layers from each color. So not only does this blend it out, but it adds additional color to her skin. So when you're selecting colors, if you're selecting it for a specific character, you're going to want to keep in mind that you're building up those colors. So you may want to start a little bit lighter and work your way darker, at least until you're a little more familiar with using those colors. So we've got some really beautiful skin tone going on with Naomi right now. I'm really happy with this. Click my marker, good. Now I'm gonna go in with R39, add a little bit of blush to her cheeks and a little bit of blush to her lips. So we'll start with the lips because the lips are kind of the easier part. And then for her blush, since this is such a dark red, I add it just pretty much to the top parts of her cheeks. And if I find that I did a little too much, I can go in with RE04 and just blend it out a little. You want to be careful not to push the color around too much because it's going to lighten it up and it's going to look a little bit strange. Next, we're going to go in with our, let's say, BV25. We're going to apply this to her lips, and this is really going to give contour to her face because it's a pretty dark shadow color. Underneath her nose, to the tops of her eyes, and then I like doing it where her eyebrows are, so it casts a little bit of a shadow. The bone ridge casts a little bit of a shadow. And then, of course, where her hair overlaps her face. And you might also want to do it just a little bit on the side of the face. That's more in shadow. And then when that dries, I'm going to go in with E49. So that's had a chance to dry. I'm going to go in with E49. And as you can see, we're getting really nice, sharp, crisp delineations because we allowed the ink to dry a bit. So as somebody who creates content for all ages, but particularly children, I think representing a variety of people is really, really important. So I want to challenge you, as well as other creators here on YouTube, to do your best to try and add a little bit more diversity to your own work and what you represent. I think it's a really worthwhile challenge. Everybody deserves to see themselves represented in media and in content. Okay, so I used E27 just to blend E49 back a little bit. Now we're gonna go in with E59 Cardinal. And we're just gonna add a little bit more red to her lips. You could add it to her cheeks, but I think she's beautiful the way she is. And I'm going to switch over now to Y, quadruple 0. I'm going to do an all over fill in her eyes. And then I'm going to grab YG03. And I'm just leaving a little slim crescent. And I'm going to go back and just kind of blend that out. I really love doing fun reactive techniques in the eyes. And then we're going to use YG63. Blend back with YG03. And then while it's still wet, I'm going to do the tops of her eyes in Lapis Lazuli, which is B18. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. You don't have to use Copics for these tutorials. That's just what I'm using. You can use almost any alcohol marker you wish. We're going to blend that out with our YG63. And next, we're going to start working on her hair. We're going to start with Champagne E71, and I'm going to, you can do an all over fill or you can leave highlights. It's really up to you. I'm going to do an all over fill. Alright, so I applied E71 all over to her hair. We're going to go in now with W9. And we're going to use kind of circular, fun, springy technique, trying to leave some highlights in the hair. So think about it kind of like painting clouds. Using a springy technique to render her hair, and I'm trying to leave lots of highlights. So in our last tutorial with Kara, we did a technique that doesn't really rely much on using the brush. Today's technique is much more brush reliant. I feel like this is a better way to render hair texture, especially curly hair texture like Naomi's. So that's another reason why when I review alcohol markers, I'm looking for that brush. And I want a good brush with lots of spring. I don't want a fiber brush that's gonna fray and get nasty if I push down. So we have our base color for her hair, W9. I'm gonna go in again, do another. And remember what we talked about in our last tutorial? We talked about how every layer should cover less than the one before, especially if you're trying to build up contrast. So that's what we're doing here. So I'm sort of letting my brush skip over the paper here and there. And this technique does require a fair bit of control, so it's something you might want to practice on before you use it on a piece you really care about. You can see I am making some mistakes, but they're not really a problem. Next, we're going to go in and do the same thing with W10. I'll do that in time lapse. And of course, I want to point out that not all darker skinned people have dark hair. The book Honey Smoke is a beautiful example of just some of the variety you can get with different hair colors. This character happens to have dark hair, and not every dark character or darker skinned person has the same hair texture either. Again, this character happens to have this hair texture, but you guys can do a quick Google image search for loads of fun inspiration. I don't want to even pretend like I'm speaking for a group of people or speaking outside of my lane, so I'm just doing this as a demonstration to kind of get you started. I highly recommend you do research and look into it and work from reference and work from people you know. So I'm using the same color, W10, to fill in her eyebrows. And then finally we're gonna do 111 Special Black, just to do the sort of the darkest shadows in her hair. Now, at the end of this video, I'm gonna go in and do highlights using a variety of sort of white and opaque white tools. So that's when I'm gonna add some really nice specular highlights to her curls to show how glossy and pretty they are. But I would say, oh, there we go. Sorry if I got off camera. That little headshot of Naomi is done. So what I'm going to do is we're going to skip ahead to the ones I want to walk you through, and then I'm going to do all the rest of them in time lapse. And as always, if you guys have any questions about how I'm doing something or why I'm doing something, check out some of my other videos, especially the ones recommended in the description, and then hit me up with a comment. I am happy to answer your questions. So we're gonna skip right ahead to her profile. I already started the top of the eye for this. I'll add another layer of shadow to it, and we're going to dive right in with our B23 as our toning shadow color. Now, just like we mentioned earlier, I'm going to quickly sketch in our light source as a reminder for both of us. And then I'm going to go ahead and start rendering in the shadows. Now, what's neat about doing a pre-toning technique is you basically kind of prepared the skin, prepared the illustration, I guess. So you've already started thinking about where your shadows are going to go, how you want to place them, and you've already darkened the paper a little bit, so it's just going to get easier from there. Now, one thing I do want to point out, if you're rendering just anybody, I really recommend using tone papers, at least trying it out. I have a class coming up with Plaza where I'm going to show how to use tone papers to render people and things a little bit in a different way and a little bit more effectively. But using a tone paper eliminates starting from white, which is like starting from zero. I often think of it as kind of fighting the white of the paper because you're building up colors and it takes more layers to kind of hit the colors you might want to be able to reach. So I'm just blending that back a little bit with our colorless blender, and then we're going to grab E04. And we're going to do it across the bridge of her nose. We're going to do it on the tops of her eyes. We're going to do it underneath her nose, the insides of her ears, and then we're going to do her lips. And I have to think about this because profile view is always a fun challenge for me. Of course, if you mess it up, you can use the colorless blender just to knock it back a little bit. Next, we are going to use E17 to do an all over fill. So I'll go ahead and do that and then check in with you guys. I also want to point out that the steps I go through for Naomi may change a little bit here and there. There's no perfect order of operations. There's no one way to do it. It's really all about just finding a method or methods, a set of methods that help you achieve what you want to achieve. So don't stress out too much about it. So I'm using the same color. And we're doing another layer on her face because she is facing, like the light's coming kind of from behind her. So her head is blocking a lot of the light from hitting the majority of her face. But that doesn't mean it's not hitting her face at all. It just means it's not hitting most of her face. And as we mentioned earlier, you can use a lighter skin tone. Let's say we want to do a little bit of rim lighting on the nose. And this color may be too close to our other color to really help us achieve that goal. I may have to switch out to something lighter. But you can use that lighter color to kind of push the color back and add additional lighting. You could, if you really want to, you could use the colorless blender for that as well. It will do it. The reason I don't like it doing it with darker skin tones is it tends to just kind of get really splotchy and uneven and noticeable. So I do try to use lighter skin tones just to kind of add highlights to darker skin tones. So I'm using E04 to add some blush. And to start rendering her lips. And then we're going to use E27 to start coloring in some of the skin shadows. Again, the light is blocking the majority of her face, so I'm going to be doing a lot of soft blending so that we don't have a harsh transition line. And the reason we want the soft blending is because the form has moved away from the light source, or it's blocked by something, so the shadows are being caused not just by a blockage of light, but by the form moving away from the light source in space. So we're going to go back to E17 and we're going to blend this out. And again, we're adding basically an intermediate layer with that, so just keep that in mind. And I'm going to do another layer with E27. And then we're going to switch over to doing some of our blush and our lips. So we're going to use R59. And do a little bit of blush here. And we're going to color in a little bit here, as well as her lips. And then we're going to use our shading color, which was, and now I can't remember if we used amethyst or if we used grayish violet. Let's go with grayish violet. I'm basically doing this anywhere the light is blocked directly. I'm going to give this a chance to dry, and we're going to switch over to her eyes, starting with Y quadruple 0. I'm going to do an all over fill. Then we're going to grab Y03. Then we're going to grab Y63. Then we're going to grab B18. I'm going to grab Y63 again and push that color back a little bit. Now it seems like that has had a chance to dry, so we're going to grab E49. And just going to use this for our last layer of skin tone shadow. Okay, so I am going to do an all over fill of her hair with E71 and then check back in with you guys. So now that we have our base color down, we're going to use W9. Now with this prior headshot, I didn't really do as much with shading the hair using the lighting as I should have. So let's do more lighting effects now that you guys kind of get the gist of doing curlier hair, or at least a type of curlier hair. So one of the things I'm going to leave is I'm going to leave some rim lighting, but I'm going to really emphasize curls and kind of little areas, little islands where the light has hit the curls. So we're going to really define Naomi's curls at this stage and leave lots of little color islands. And we're still using kind of that bouncy, I kind of think about it like little sheep jumping, but that's, or little fish jumping maybe. And you want to kind of vary the shape and vary the texture here and there. I don't do a lot of tutorials with Naomi, so if you guys would like to see more tutorials with Naomi, let me know in the comments. Give me a big old thumbs up and say, yeah, we want more type tutorials with Naomi. So I'm going to do another layer with W9. And I think I've mentioned this in other videos, but the reason you guys see me do stuff with my OCs so much is I want y'all to read my comic. I figure the best way to get y'all to read it, check it out, give it the time of day, is show you guys the characters, talk about the characters while I'm working on tutorials. So if you're just so sick and tired of hearing me talk about 7-inch Kara, then I don't know, support it, let me know, and I'll move on to other characters, other kind of character designs, because then I will know that I have mission accomplished. Okay, so we're gonna switch over to W10. And if you let your markers really dry in between layers, you're gonna get more distinct layers, but I'm trying to get kind of soft transitions between the layers. So for this one, we're gonna focus more on adding shading to the core of her hair, the area that would be blocked by the light, and towards the bottom of her hair, which is further away from the light source. And then finally, we're gonna do 110. Now after all these little headshots have had a chance to dry, I will probably go in with 110 one more time and do a final layer just to get kind of that crisper transition and that stronger layering. What we're doing now is really soft, sort of blended transitions. Alright, so that is another super cute Naomi bust finished. Okay, so next we're doing the one where Naomi is facing into the light, and this could be a really great opportunity to do some rim lighting with a layer color. I wasn't really happy with how little E34 was pushing it back, so I'm grabbing E51 instead. We're going to switch those out. And we're going to start by placing our shadows using BV23. So we've got her ear will probably be in shadow behind her ear. Definitely the underside of her jaw should be in shadow. And the areas where her hair has kind of covered things should be in shadow. I'm going to soften the transition on her face just a little bit, especially on her nose. I'm going to leave the jaw pretty intact because that would actually be pretty dark. In fact, we're going to go in again and just kind of do another layer on the jaw just to really enforce that shadow. And then we're going to go in with E34. And we're going to do a little bit of blush at the tips of her ear, a little bit of blush on her nose, and some blush here around her eyes. And then we're going to do an Oliver fill with E17. Okay, so we have our Oliver fill of E17. Let's grab E51, and we're just going to kind of dab it on her nose and on kind of the apples of her cheeks, and it might not be super noticeable. You might want to do a couple layers. It's really up to you and your taste level, what you want to see. And then we're going to do another fill with E17. Well, not really a fill actually, I misspoke. We're going to do another layer though with E17. So since she's looking into the light source, we don't want to go too dark with her skin. So I'm not going to do as many layers of shadow as I normally would. I'm going to do another layer with E04. We're going to do E27. We do want to get really dark with the areas that are away from the light source. So areas overlapped by hair and the underside of the face. Then we're going to go in with our E39, just a little bit up there on the cheek where she's blushing. And we're going to go in with BV25, particularly on these areas that wouldn't be getting much light. And then once this dries, we're going to go in with E49. Okay, Now we're gonna go in with our E49 and basically just do kind of the underside of her chin. So really easy. Now I'm gonna do an Oliver fill with her hair using E71. Okay, Oliver fill accomplished. This is another one where I want to explore more of the lighting. So we're going to really try to leave a lot of rim lighting and focus also on kind of creating a core of darker hair. Now Naomi's hair has a lot of volume, and it would have kind of a mind of its own, but I drew it much shorter than it actually is in the comic, so we're gonna take a note from that and just kind of render it like a curly, almost a ball shape. And hopefully that'll kind of give you guys a better idea on how, or a method for rendering hair with volume. Okay, so that is our first layer of W9. Going in with our second layer, trying to cover a lot less than I did the first time. I'll tell you guys a secret. We've been using Copic markers every day for about 3 to 4 hours every day doing tutorials. They start to really hurt. Not as ergonomic as I'd like. Alright, so that is W9. Now we're going to switch over to W10. And we're rendering even less this time. And we're kind of focusing on the sphere of her skull as being our darkest area. So if it helps you remember, you can sketch that in first and color it, and then work your way around that. Sometimes sketching in the shadows helps me remember their placement a little bit better. And I'm going to do another layer with W10. Just really try to get that nice and dark. Give that a second to evaporate, and then we're going to go with 110. And even in your light areas, you do want to add some darker contrast. It just kind of helps create form and depth so everything doesn't just seem like flat and round. So even up here, I'm still going to do a few little curls. All right, so that leaves 5 more to go. We've got 3 down. Okay, we're gonna move on down to this view here where she's turned away from her lighting, and we're starting with BG23, and we could almost just color the whole thing with BG23 to begin with, just to kind of establish our shadow. But I'm gonna leave just a little bit of rim lighting as though the light's making it to the other side of her face. And I'll knock this one back just a little bit, and then we're going to use E04 to establish our blush. And you can only see just a little bit of her face, so you don't really need to use much. Next, I'm going to do an Oliver fill with E17. For the areas that would be light kissed, we're going to use E51 just to add in a little bit of highlight, maybe to the top of her ear or to the tip of her nose. Then we're going to go back in with E17 and do another layer, and it's almost a fill. I am leaving a little bit of room for light, but like this view would have the light hitting the front of her face, this light is going to have the light, this view is going to have the light hitting the majority of her hair. And I'm going to go in with our warm E04. And then I'm going to use E27. I'm kind of following the apples of her cheeks as well as areas that might have a cast shadow from her hair. And blend that out a little bit with E17, at least on her nose and on her ear. Do another layer with E27. And then we're going to use R39 here on her cheek, maybe at the bottom of her ear. Switching over now to our shadow color, we're going to take BV25. And we're really going to cast some shade. I like the quarter views turned away and the back views because they're the quickest to do. Alright, so E49, our darkest brown. Maybe a little bit in the nose, and then blend that back out with E27. So next, I need to do an Oliver fill with E71 on her hair. We're going to use W9. We're going to use W9, and like we did with this one where we tried to create a rim highlight, I'm going to do the same with this, but I'm going to do that in time lapse. So you'll notice that I did leave some highlights over on this side of the hair. What I'm going to do is I'm going to blend them out a little bit. I don't want the transition to be so harsh. But I'm going to leave them pretty striking over here. And I'm going to go in and do another layer with W9, again in time lapse. Next, we're going to do the same thing with W10. I'm going to do 2 layers and then do both of them in time lapse. And then finally, we're going to do a layer with 110, 110. add a few darker highlight, or a few darker low lights to the top of the hair. Okay, so we are about halfway done. I think you guys basically get the gist, so I'm going to work on the rest in time lapse. Okay, so we've got our 8 basic heads colored. This last one's still drying a little bit. I'm gonna go in with 110 and just add a little bit of extra depth and dimension to her curls, particularly as they move away from the light source. And that's a great thing to do kind of after your alcohol marker has had a chance to kind of dry. That way you can get another layer in. And I'm still using just the same sort of light, sort of flicking strokes. You know how they like to say, or how people will say, that you can't really know joy if you don't know pain. You can't really know sweetness if you haven't ever had bitterness. Well, that's all about contrast, and you really define your light source by how dark the darkest shading on whatever you're rendering, how dark that gets. So if you're really trying to depict light and shadow, don't be afraid to get really, really dark, and don't be afraid to get really, really light, because nothing's gonna really explain and delineate that shadow quite so much as like some really bright rim lighting, for example. And it's the sort of thing that you can only improve if you consume more media, consume more comics, consume more things that utilize that kind of art, and if you practice, practice, practice. So hopefully you guys were able to kind of follow what I was doing in the time-lapse portion of this video. If you watched my other videos, it should be pretty easy to understand, and kind of a lot of what I'm showing you would also work with watercolor. You might have to change how you handle things just a little bit, but it should be very similar. So I love just kind of going back, saving my smallest details for the end, dotting my I's, crossing my T's, that kind of thing. We're going to use the colorless blender to push some of the color out of her eyes. I think it creates a really cool effect. You can use another lighter color if you want, like you could use E51, would actually make her eyes look a bit more hazel. Maybe we should go back and do that. So maybe just use a little bit of E51 down at the bottom, kind of delineate her irises a bit. You could also use a darker green, you could use the blue. So all that we really have left now is to add some white highlights. So just like I did in the Kara video, I have 3 types of highlights I can add. I'm going to start with the Signo, and I'm just going to use it to add a little bit of shine to her eyes. There's lots of ways you can do these sort of highlights. My work is really inspired by manga. I particularly like manga just because for me personally that was the first time I'd encountered a female comic artist. So that was a really, really long time ago, but I really like the style. I like how soft and sensitive you can draw characters. I like the types of storytelling techniques that are prevalent in manga. So if you happen to like my art and you'd like to find more art like it, other than checking out my blog at natosoup.blogspot.com and my webcomic at 7inchkara.com and 7inchkara.tumblr.com, whichever's easier for you, I highly recommend you check out. Go to your local library and see what kind of manga they have. Ask. Don't be afraid to ask. And if they're a jerk about it, then you just have a jerk librarian. It's not that you asked a bad question. They're just a jerk. But they shouldn't be. Those tides, they are a-changing. So I'm also using the white Signo just to add some highlights to her hair. know I told you earlier in the video that I would do that. You can also add it to her nose, particularly in like the rim lighting. So where she's facing the front. In fact, this is going to be a really good one. I'm going to go back to this one with an opaque. Here, we'll go back with the Pitt pen. Because we want to add, it's a little bit hard to do it with the bullet nib, but you might want to add some light highlights. And that's going to really kind of inform where the light's coming from as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it was useful, helpful, and informative for you guys. I certainly hope it inspired you. If you've checked out my other tutorials and you still have some questions, feel free to ask me those questions down in the description below. I'm more than happy to help. And if you'd like to see something in particular demonstrated, make sure you check out my Power Hour art streams, which are on most Fridays, not every Friday, but you can find information about the upcoming week's Power Hour by checking out my community tab. If you'd like to learn how to use alcohol markers and you live in the Nashville area, sign up for one of my Copic and alcohol marker classes taught through the Nashville Plaza. If you'd like how to tell stories using comics or you'd like to learn the basics of drawing, you can take my Making Comics class with Nashville Community Ed as well. Both sets of classes are designed to be very affordable with the majority of materials provided, so you don't really need to bring anything. If you like what I do and you want to help me do it, if you want access to the templates that I used in these videos, head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/natosoup. Help support what I do at just $2 a month and gain access to templates like this so you can color along during our next tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was useful, helpful, and informative for you guys. I hope you guys were inspired and are going to go and practice some of these skills, and I certainly hope you will diversify your own art. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope to see you guys again really soon, and I hope you'll have a wonderful day. Bye guys!